Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Rancher Meetup. We're excited to have an enormous crowd here today. Looks like this is going to be the biggest meetup we've had yet, which is, I suppose, not surprising. Every month it seems like these meetups get bigger and bigger and more people come. So thank you to the hundreds and hundreds of people who registered and all of you who are here. Um, I'm Shannon Williams from Rancher, and today we're going to be talking about building a Docker catalog. I'm joined, as always, by my co-founder here at Rancher, Darren Shepard. Darren, you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
Darren is the chief architect here at Rancher, and he's going to be piping in with a few things over the course of today's session. In addition to Darren and I today, we also have someone who's presented on our meetups maybe 2 or 3 times now, Bill. Bill Maxwell is our principal DevOps engineer here at Rancher, and he is really, in a lot of ways, the mastermind behind the catalog. And so Bill is going to be really driving into the weeds and explaining all of the, someone told me the other day, the black voodoo magic that we do to make some of the stuff work. So Bill, say hi and welcome to the meetup.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right. So as usual, Bill and Darren are actually out in Arizona, and I'm in California. So we are in different places, but as I would imagine, we've had people joining us today from all over for these meetups. So before we get into it, we always just like to reiterate and make sure everyone understands the purpose of these events. This is not a webinar; it's a meetup. It's not meant to be one-directional. It's not meant to be us, just giving you a bunch of marketing blurbs and glog and slog. We want to get into technology. We want to talk about what's possible, what people are doing. We feel like there's a meetup and it's owned by everyone who comes, and so we have a bunch of rules. For that, it means we don't set end times for these meetings. We try to get the main content done relatively quickly. Sometimes it goes long. Sometimes we find things break and we have to deal with them because we're demoing like crazy. But the real key is this is a place for you to ask your questions and to give your thoughts and share your insights on the space of containers. So, if you've got ideas, if you've got things you want to share, put them in the question bar where we will get to them. So the idea of the meetup is you guys ask questions as they come up, as you see things that make sense, that don't make sense, or if you don't believe we're doing something the right way, holler it out. Put it in the questions. We're constantly reviewing those as we're talking. If I'm talking, Darren or Bill will be going through the questions. If one of them are talking, I'll be going through the questions, and we'll stop. We'll try to address them. If you ask a question that we're just about to talk about, we may, hold off on answering you right away. And then I try to get those questions out in front of everybody as well, so that it is a chance for you to share and see what other kind of questions other people are asking. So please don't worry about asking a dumb question. There really aren't any. I've yet to hear one, and we are 10th meetup like this. We do them every month, so hopefully you should feel comfortable asking any question. The other thing to think about as well is if there's topics you'd like us to cover in future meetups, use the question bars to throw them in there. It would be great to have a whole meetup on this topic, or I'd love to come and present our use case on this topic, or we're doing something amazing with Docker, and I think it'd be really interesting to share. We love it. We love guest speakers. We've had a ton of them. We want you to speak at this meetup. If you have an idea, you can always tweet it to us or email it to us. And we have so many people who participate. So join the conversation. Every month this screen gets crazier as people post pictures with them. And we've seen just about everything: people getting pizza, people with their daughters, people wearing Rancher shirts, people at with coloring books about containers. I think we've seen it all. So on Twitter, this is how you communicate with each other. Use the hashtag Rancher Meetup. Show us what you're doing. Show us where you are. If it's like 6 feet of snow outside, show us a picture of what it looks like outside, so that we all can appreciate what's going on out there. So thank you, all of you who do that and who share what you're doing, and please keep it up. We'll retweet you, we'll follow you, we'll get it out there. So, all right, now down to the dirty stuff. We have quite a bit to cover today. We're going to try and move quickly. We're going to start by just diving into the concept of the application catalog and where it came from, how we developed it, I'm going to go through that and then jump into a demo and actually show you how to use the catalog, how to deploy a standard catalog item, and the concept of a private catalog. So I'll lay out the basics and help you understand, what we were thinking when we built this new feature into Rancher in the last couple months. And then beyond that, we'll have Bill go into really the depths of this and dive into how people how people can go further. So I just got a note that it sounds like my audio may be a little bit scratchy, so I am going to quickly switch maybe to a different audio line, and hopefully that will solve the problem. So bear with me for just a second, and hopefully I will be back in 1 second with a cleaner audio, and you'll all be able to hear me better. Sorry for the inconvenience, everyone. Hi, this is Shannon again. I'm back. Hopefully you can hear me now better, and my audio is better. This is I guess this has to do with, there's a big storm that we've been getting, and the phone line temp. I usually use my landline, so now I'm on my mobile. So hopefully my mobile is better than my landline was. But if you continue to have problems hearing me, let me know, and I'll certainly repeat anything that doesn't come through clearly. Okay, so let's dive in. We've got a lot to cover today. I'll be going through the high level of the catalog, and then Bill is really going to carry the bulk of the heavy lifting today. He's going to show us how to build these catalog items, what goes into a compose file, and how we develop it with configuration, injection, and all sorts of interesting things. And then he's actually going to, as always, we're going to demo this. We're going to show you how to build a catalog template. He's a big drone fan. He wanted to do one for drone. So he's going to show you how to use the awesome CI tool drone and build that out as a catalog. Then we'll wrap up with just a couple kind of standard things we always cover, just the latest updates on Rancher, and we've got a couple of releases that have come out or just about to come out, and then we'll kind of talk through a couple of housekeeping things. But otherwise, please fire away with your questions as we go, and we'll do our best to answer them all. For anyone who's not familiar with Rancher, and this is your first attempt, Rancher Labs is a software company, and we develop tools for helping companies run Docker in production. Our main two components are Rancher, which is a software management platform, what we're mostly going to be talking about today, and it's used for deploying your own private container service and used by thousands of companies around the world to run their containers and deploy containers on any cloud, anywhere, at any time. And then we have another project that's called Rancher OS, which many people are familiar with. It is a tiny 27 meg operating system built to run Docker explicitly. So it's the smallest little OS you can run with just basically the Linux kernel and Docker. And the goal there is minimize the footprint, make it really easy to upgrade, and keep as much of the intelligence of the operating system on top of the kernel. So that's really the tools that we build here at Rancher. And if you think about Rancher, it's really at its core, it's a management and orchestration platform that leverages a lot of amazing work that's going on inside of the Docker community to allow teams to grab compute nodes from anywhere, cattle as we think of it, VMs, physical machines, laptops, whatever hosts you have running in the cloud, and then group them into environments, which are effectively clusters, pools of resources that are isolated from one another, control who can access those environments, and then implement around those environments all of the necessary functionality you need to run containers. So a private network, storage services, orchestration, load balancing, user management, operations management. And when you deploy those environments, you are able to choose whether you want to use Swarm or Kubernetes for your control plane. So that's a really cool feature we're just rolling out now. What we just released last I think it was in December it rolled out, was this idea of a Rancher catalog. And a layer that sits on top of all this amazing orchestration to sort of take advantage of it and make it incredibly easy to spin up instances of an application. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today, is what is the, what's the role of a catalog, how do you use it, how do you get value from it, and how do you then, kind of build your own. So, we want to go through and show you how to, why we found so many people asking for a feature like this. And I think it just comes down to, at the end of the day, the catalog is based on Compose, and Compose has always been very critical to, to our vision of what container management looks like. The ability to define your application in a prescribed, atomic way is really central to Rancher. So whether you use Rancher's UI or you use the CLI or you just push from Git to our API, we're always creating what we call stacks or groups of servers that are based on Compose, or groups of services that are based on Compose. And these stacks are, whether you make changes to them, they're always represented by a Docker Compose file and a Rancher Compose file that describes that environment. So anyone who's used Rancher will be really familiar with these concepts. But this is really the core approach to, making change, defining environments, bringing things up, is you're really modifying this configuration file, this Compose file that describes your environment. We use it to create the network, to describe upgrades, to leverage service discovery, to take advantage of the private network to connect things. We use it to create volumes and inject environment variables. It defines all the scheduling policies for where hosts should run. It defines scale. It programs health checks and tells the system what to do if a health check fails. It is where we program the load balancer. So really everything that's the configuration of the environment from a container perspective is defined in a Compose file. And so when you think about the importance of it, what we found among our users is that they really start to leverage Compose heavily. In fact, what we see is that Compose explodes as companies move from traditional monolithic environments to something like this, a microservice where their systems are broken up into smaller components talking to one another. Each of those components typically is made up of one or more Compose files. And as you imagine, what happens is, as an organization, you start to have lots of these Compose files describing different components within your application. So on the phone just yesterday with someone who was telling the story about how they had switched from a monolith to a microservice, and really it was the development of 42 different services that they ended up with to deliver a couple applications that their company made available to its users that allowed them to start consolidating their resources better, utilizing their resources better, delivering better experience, changing faster. So the move to microservices makes a lot of sense, but you have to start thinking of each of these little services as their own deployment, as their own Compose file that describes them. And then through the life cycle of one of these, you start to realize you're going to actually have lots of these pairs of Docker Compose and Rancher Compose files. So from kind of environments for developers to spin up some of these services so they can work with them or develop with them just on their laptop. You may have a version of a Compose file that describes your services for that use case and that configuration, that environment. And then you may have multiple Compose files for testing environments, a staging Compose, which is your next release or your next set of releases for any given service. And then there's always a prod version, what is actually in prod that's out there that sort of defines that state. And most of the users I talk to have rollback Compose files that they keep effectively in Git. In fact, all of these things are kept in Git, and so you very quickly end up with really a full repo of these different Compose files that are available for developers or QA teams or operations teams to pull from to deploy state and deploy systems into states. And this is the magic, I think, in so many ways of containers is you have now this ability to have a fully atomic element that is the container that's always the same, and you also have this atomic element that is the environment or the stack that is consistently defined, that allows you to really reduce the amount of error as you move through your CI/CD process, you move through your app development lifecycle. So what we really saw, and we saw this among our own thing, was that there was because there was like minor configurations and things people wanted to do, there was an opportunity to kind of take these Git repos and start to push them into something like a catalog, something that made it really easy for people to spin these up directly within Rancher, and give it a nice framework for defining and deploying these individual compose files. So we started building this last fall, and Bill really architected it, but it is the new Rancher catalog, and we host it on GitHub. It's public. It's called just under our Rancher account on GitHub under Rancher-catalog, and you can see it if you drill into the templates element of it. It's got dozens of these different templates, any of which they're all open source. Obviously, you can take them, you can look at them, you can modify them, you can kind of build upon them to fork it and change it to your own version. And this set of public templates is open, so we're accepting people's pull requests. If you've got ideas, things you'd like to put in there, we'd love to do it. We're just now starting to work on how to make a sort of, we test all of these, so anything that goes in our catalog, we test and we do some validation on. We want to create a market, market where people can just share these, or some type of a directory where people can post them. So over time, we want to make it really easy for everyone to share these catalog items as they develop them. We're already getting a ton of contributions from monitoring companies and software companies and DNS companies and all sorts of different people that are deploying modules inside of Rancher to make change. So on top of that Git repo, then we layered in the catalog concept. And the real power in the catalog concept is not just that you can click a button to launch one of these compose files. You can do that already pretty directly. The actually nice thing is we allow you to configure and do variable substitution directly from UI to make it easy for people in your organization to make minor changes to a compose file and launch versions with their specific maybe scheduling policies or their specific scale requirements, or maybe the plugins that they want on a specific platform. So you can really allow not just the deployment of a file, but also the configuration of it. And I think within a day of us launching the catalog, we had I had a dozen emails from people saying, "Can I get a private version of this?" And so, which we had been planning, we just didn't roll it out when we launched the catalog. So about a month later, we made the private catalog concept available. So that's what I'm going to show you today, is sort of this concept of the catalog and how it works. And just if you're following along, you can go to the Rancher catalog in Git and see all of the stuff we're going to do today. So if you look here inside the Rancher catalog, there is a template section, which will give you a really good idea, if you want to follow along to some of the stuff Bill's doing later and showing you how to build these actual templates and the magic that he uses in terms of actually configuring them and using the metadata service to discover things. You can certainly kind of take a look at these, but there's a basic approach we use to define a catalog. We have every one of these items has a Docker compose and a Rancher compose file that makes them up, and then we try to add an image and a little bit of descriptors into the file as well so that we can consume it. So if you come to your Rancher implementation, this is my lab environment, and one of the things you'll see now is this new catalog icon up here. So within a catalog, you're able to see all of these different types of applications that we've made available. So these are the standard ones that are available from Rancher, and they really do range into all sorts of different types of categories. There's big data tools like Hadoop that we've made available. There's entire Elk stack you can launch if you want to deploy Elasticsearch, Kibana, and Logstash. There are a number of monitoring tools that are either available or coming. So Sysdig built their own catalog items. If you've attended our Sysdig meetup, we're users and big fans. But there's a number of other monitoring tools that will be coming in the next few weeks or months as other companies are already working on catalog items for other platforms. Then there's a bunch of internal, like what we call Rancher services, and the most common one right now is sort of DNS configuration. So we talked in our Amazon meetup last month about how you could use our Route 53 DNS service to effectively automate the configuration of your IPs with a DNS service externally. Since then, Cloudflare, DNS Simple, PointHQ, I mean, most of the other large DNS services have deployed their own versions of the same type of thing so that people can configure those. So we've had a lot of great participation. The other area you'll see is storage. This is when we talk a little bit about Convoy and GlusterFS and other storage services that are coming. All those are in this catalog under storage services. So there's a lot to consume here, and a lot more coming over time as people deploy different kinds of stacks. So just to get us started, I'm just going to deploy an ELK environment, or maybe just an Elasticsearch deployment. But when you click on one of these catalog items, there's a couple of key things to sort of note. The first is the catalog is versioned. So if you go back here and look at the catalog and you look at Elasticsearch, you can see that I have two versions of the catalog, two versions of the templates. And each of these versions has a version number that explains which version it is I'm launching. And the nice thing is when you launch multiple versions, you can include in future versions all of the upgrade logic, so that you're able to upgrade a catalog item. So here I've got this 1.71 version of Elasticsearch, and the other question it's going to ask me is configuration options. So I give this a name. We'll call this Meetup. Oops. And we'll give the cluster a name. And if you click on the preview item, you can see the entire Docker Compose and Rancher Compose files that are describing this environment that we're actually launching. And any configuration options that are defined here are going to be defined in this answers file. And you can see in the Rancher Compose, there's a whole new section called .catalog, which Bill is going to go through in a little bit more depth. But this explains how to do variable substitution and inject configuration information into the service. So once you've got it configured and you're ready to launch, you can launch a service. And if you've clicked auto start, the system will immediately start looking for capacity and start the process of bringing up the stack of services. So in the case of Elasticsearch, it's running 4 services: a master, data nodes, clients, and a UI called Cope. And the environment is defined here, obviously. Within Rancher, we always expose the compose file that describes what we're doing as part of this environment. So here you can see it all coming up and deploying. And as it deploys, you're able to kind of follow along and track what's happening just from here. So it'll deploy first the masters, because these other elements are dependent. So your dependencies will dictate the start order and allow you to see which services come up. And it won't activate, for instance, Cope won't start until it requires the clients, until the clients are actually up and running. So the other thing you'll notice is that the service, once it's come up, is telling me that there's an upgrade available. And that's because we use the 1.71 version of this instead of the 1.8 version or 1.73 version. And as soon as a service is available, you can sort of see it at every level that there, when an upgrade is available, the system will allow you to effectively upgrade that and notify you. So a lot of the users that I know are already using private catalogs, their use cases is centrally they manage these catalog items. They push out new versions, and all the development teams take advantage of those services as they come along. So once you've chosen the version you want to launch, you can then pick a new version, and if you want to make any changes, you can drill in and see what's changed in that new version. And once you say upgrade, within the version, it'll actually tell the system whether it wants to do a rolling upgrade or a blue-green upgrade and launch all that at the same time. So now it'll go through the process of upgrading the service, and once it's all upgraded, I'll have the option to accept that upgrade or roll it back. So the other thing I wanted to show you was the private catalog concepts. So over here I have my personal Rancher catalog that I've created, and it's just got one template in it right now. It's got a little content management system called Plone, which I got from a friend who had built it. And here you can see I've got a Docker Compose and a Rancher Compose file. So all of this is available in my Rancher catalog. And I'm going to go into Rancher now, and on the admin side, you'll see an option to add a private catalog. So under admin, you go to settings, and then within settings, if I add a catalog URL, we can call this new environment, private. So we're adding a new URL, and here you can see that if you wanted to, you could remove the Rancher catalog. If you don't want to expose that to everyone, just remove that from here and save it, and it'll be gone. But I'm just going to add in this new repo. So it's just the name of your repo.git on your GitHub account. And once you've set that up, can save it, and we can come back here to the catalog, and we should be able to see now that instead of just seeing category, we also see catalog option. We have now the public library or just my private catalog. And I can view in my private catalog that I have clone available. And here I can look at clone, see that I've got version 1 of this catalog item available. And it's, if I want to, I can drill down, look and see what's inside it, and launch the service. And so now it's going to go out and launch my clone system. So adding a private catalog is really straightforward. It's very easy to deploy these things, set them up. Once you've upgraded, you can, as I was saying before, you can finish the upgrade or roll it back. And you have the ability to create new items, share them with your team, get them out to people quickly, allow upgrades as they happen, and make it really easy for people to start to consume this technology. So with that, hopefully I've given you a good understanding of sort of the basics of the catalog and the principles behind what we're building here. And we can now kind of dive into a little bit more depth, build content on actually building these catalog templates, how to, what goes into architecting the actual compose files, what kind of options you have, and how to design it. Bill, are you all set up? Do you want me to transfer over the control of the service?
Yeah, can you share the screen? Or let me share the screen.
Yes, I will make you the presenter. There you go. And while Bill's setting up, I know there were a ton of questions firing off about was plenty about the audio problems, but I'll be responding to all your questions as Bill gets set up as well. So one of the questions I saw someone ask was, what version of Rancher are we using? This is 0.51. So if you saw down at the bottom, we sort of exposed that now publicly, so you can see which version it is. And I think about 10 people asked, can we have private repos? Can we have private repos? Those are all, the answer is yes, you definitely can have private repos. So, all right, off you go, Bill.
All right, can you see my screen? It's not giving me the usual. Anyone?
Yeah, your screen looks great.
Okay, good. All right. I'm hooked up through my monitor. So, is there a way to force it to this slide? All right. Well, it's not cooperating with me on which screen it's going to show on, so I apologize. I'll try and make these a little bit bigger. We'll just do it this way. All right.
You
so
can launch into your screen.
Well, it ends up displaying on the other monitors hooked up, and my network's connected through my monitor, so I can't unplug it.
No problem. Fire away.
Sorry about that. Yep, I should have tested that before. All right, so looking at catalog entries, the catalog entry is sort of the final package, the last bit that gets presented to users, and so by the time it gets there, you've made a lot of decisions for that end user and sort of what they will need to control and how they're going to basically interact with this. And so, it's probably the simplest view of the app. Kind of the next level down, as you can see, we show you the compose file, but within kind of the catalog view itself, we don't allow you to directly change that. We do make all of our source available for the compose files in the Rancher compose templates repo. But so you can see what's going on, but the knobs are up at the catalog entry in the question. And then in those compose files, there's a bunch of services that usually get defined that sort of act, they could be one or multiple containers sort of acting together to perform a single kind of function. And then each one of those is kind of built at the container level. And each one of those has their own development lifecycle and process kind of going through. And so if you look at kind of the flow for us, when we create a template, we start with containers and look around, depending on the application, is there anything around that we can use? What do we have to build? And then kind of arrange those into services kind of based on function. Or you look at the app, the Elasticsearch is a good example. There's key roles in an Elasticsearch cluster, the master, the clients, and the data nodes. So each one of those could be its own service. Even though they're slightly similar, they have minor variances in their configuration. And so once you have those services, then you kind of express them in Compose. How do they link up? What are their main parameters? And then sort of at the same time, you can do this or as a separate step, but you basically parameterize. What is it that needs to change between this environment and that environment to make the context switch so that it will just kind of work. And then so once you have that and it's parameterized, then it becomes really easy to take it up to that next level of the catalog entry. And so looking at it, in a deep dive, at the container level, if there's an upstream image, you definitely want to use that. It's best to use, an Elasticsearch image that's built by, a community with the contributions from the Elastic group. Who better to show you and tell you how to run Elasticsearch than Elasticsearch? And is there going to be a database, and what do these kind of functions look like? And then how, what tools are you going to use? As they're coming up, there's kind of two levels of config files. How do you get them there? How are you going to deliver this? So you use shared storage, host bind mounts, other containers. So there's just a lot to kind of consider at this container level, and we'll go into these a bit more at the in the demo phase. And then once you're organizing into services, they have many parts. So typically for us, one of the services, you're looking at kind of composing these things so that there's a container kind of per function. One's the daemon, one's the configuration, one's a volume, and everything's got to be focused. And so you also want to remember that they can work together by sharing. They can share data, they can share networking, they can share all sorts of. I think every one of the kind of the walls that a container is built out of has a way to sort of either bring it down or share it, or we make extensive use of that so that you kind of, depending on if you can share a network context, like the same network interface, then you don't have this mental context of having to switch, like, oh, if I get something from this container, I have to ask in this context of that other container. You can just sort of be that container and have the same context. And then as we continue, the single data container for Rancher catalog entries in particular, we use data containers. Whether you plan on using them for anything important or not isn't so much that consideration as it is when we do in-place upgrades. The data container is typically what sort of binds it in spot to its place, so that we know as we're scheduling that we go look for the data container, and everything sort of still stays in that same context. As we were developing this, I can't tell you how many times I changed something about that data volume and got a new one and all my data was gone. It's gotten a lot better. And in newer catalog entries, we're suggesting that if you're upgrading, that you just sort of pick a volume container that, and then don't really ever change it in future iterations, just for that reason. You can roll back typically and get that data back. It's just sometimes it's scarcity. The configuration, we use a lot of const to write files. We pull a lot of data from metadata and sort of write these configuration files that but that's a single process, and we run that kind of in a Sidekick container that just pulls the configuration. It typically shares the daemon and the configuration containers typically share the same network namespace. So that way, when we request the metadata, we're requesting the metadata answers based on the IP requesting. So we're asking, from the same spot, so we get the same view of the same data. And then the daemon typically runs as its own process in its own container. And sometimes that needs to share stuff like GlusterFS needs to share the Gluster socket, and so that's put into the data volume that every other container interacts with it, shares and talks to the Gluster server that way, at least within a single instance of the service. And so once we've sort of mapped out how we're going to launch the single daemon in that application, we look at how expressing that into the compose file. And so we've got a server, we've got the daemon, we've got the configuration, load balancing, and so we just sort of define those with the parameters that are needed to run right away. And so at this point, you can hard code stuff. I mean, it's typically you're iterating to make sure everything comes up and coordinates, and once you click go repeatedly, it always comes up. At that point, you can parameterize here, or typically, I usually build with a known set of values just so that I'm just watching it and making sure that it comes up, but then go back and parameterize. Typically, you're looking for config values. If you're going to expose a port, what port should that be? Those are good things to leave, up to the user. And so once you get to this step, it becomes real easy to create the catalog entry, which just basically is adding a small blurb to the Rancher Compose YAML. We'll go through that. And then we've added the functionality to do a README, and that goes a long way towards helping users launch the app and understand sort of what's happening. We're still rolling out a lot of our READMEs, but definitely if you're going to be sharing this with someone else and you're starting fresh, make sure that you would include those right away, or right off the bat. So
there was actually, Bill, if you have a second, there was a couple questions that came in. Yep. One of them came in, I think, when I was speaking, but yeah, it's a good question. I think Peter Bauman and Clint Beacock both asked it in different ways, but they were asking about private repos and, how do you handle it when the Git server needs authentication if you want to mount that? Do you want to talk about that and sort of what we're thinking there?
Yeah, I know. I think in our minds right now, a private repo is like your own fork of a public repo on GitHub, or if you're running on GitHub Enterprise. I know we run. I think ultimately under the hood we end up running a Git clone, and so I don't think we have a way. I mean, I guess if you, I haven't tried it, but you could pass the URL with the credentials in it.
Yeah, I know that I had a conversation. Yeah, Darren, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, since I saw that question, we were looking into it, and we don't actually bundle SSH into the Rancher server container, so doing a Git clone with the SSH key won't work. So I just added it. So hopefully it'll be in the next release, which will be basically today. So supporting, like, cloning from a private repo that requires like an SSH key will be possible. It just requires you to bind mount in the key when you launch the Rancher server container.
Did you try the HTTPS with the username and the admin token from GitHub?
Yeah, you can also do the username password syntax with it. That seems to work. But that one's not as desirable because it's putting username password. But that one, I believe we already tested and works.
Awesome. It looks like it sounds like just like a dozen people have actually said that's what they need to. So great to see that everyone has the same requirement. So keep your eyes open. 0.56 is probably going to ship this today or tomorrow or the next day or two. And I think there's some enhancements there around private repos management and all that. So thank you, Peter, Christopher, Axel, and everyone who was asking questions about really secure private repos. Okay. There was a couple of questions that came in about sort of the metadata. And the question was, can we, how do you, let me see if I can get this right, how do you update the metadata in the stack? Do you use it from the catalog, or do you push it directly from the configuration file? So maybe, I think that's actually exactly what you're going to demo here. So I'll let you run with that, Bill, and we'll kind of get the demo going.
Yeah, okay. Cool. All right, so I'm going to walk through kind of just adding a demo catalog, then walking through kind of building out the drone app, and then just kind of, well, I'll probably walk through backwards. I'll start at the top with the catalog, and then walk backwards into how that was built, and then kind of go through from the bottom back up. Okay, so here I've got a Rancher 51 instance. I'll go to my settings, and I'm going to add a new catalog, call it demo. We'll add that, click save. So now when I go to add catalog, I see I've got my new Galera DB catalog entry that came over from my new demo catalog. So this one should be hitting the real official Rancher catalog. It'll be experimental. It's for those not familiar, Galera is a multi-master replicated MySQL base. We're going to be hopefully using this with kind of the Rancher HA setup in the future. So I'm just going to create a super secure instance of a database here. We use password as our root password. We'll call this drone. We'll say drone is our user, and it will have the same password as the root. So you can see here, this is the configuration that we'll be launching. It'll probably be easier to show it a little bit later. And then here's the Rancher Compose, and here you can kind of see this .catalog section that we've added. Highlight all. Just defining the key pieces of metadata that are absolutely required are the .catalog, the name, the version, a brief description, and the UUID. Those are required in order for the catalog to process any single template. So I've set my options, and I am going to launch my Galera DB cluster. So while it's doing that, did any questions come in, or?
No specific questions. I think you're doing good.
Okay. So we'll watch it come up on this host. And so here you can see a bunch of new Galera servers are starting to pop up. And the first one that was created was the data container. This one's going to serve as the base where all of the configuration and all of the actual database data will be stored. This is just storing it in a Docker volume on the host. And so then here we've got the Galera configuration file. So that one starts up. This one's just runs some basic configuration scripts. This one is the actual daemon for Galera. So here you can see it's doing this command giddy-up, wait for service. That's a new side project we're sort of working on right now to basically help with scripting control statements within kind of the Rancher context. So A lot of times when you're coming up and you're going to be relying on configuration from the metadata service, it only knows about the containers that are up and running. And so if you have a 3-node cluster, the first node will know about itself, the second node will know about itself and the first node, and the third node will know about all 3 of them. So to avoid that, GiddyUp has a kind of a helper where it waits for the set scale on the service and for at least that many containers to be reporting in before kind of allowing the script to flow. And then it provides the basic capability of, so it allows you to kind of have control structures in a shell script that makes it simple. We'll have the source code that we'll jump into in a second. And then we've got this leader forwarder. Ideally this particular function will go away as we come up with an HA config. But the purpose of this right now is we need the service, we need all of the instances of Galera up and running so that they're actually replicating the data between them. But since we want to use transactions, go ahead. Because we want to use transactions, we want to force kind of all the reads and writes to a single instance. And so what this is doing is it's basically looking at the create index on the container, which is the order it was created within the service, and picking the lowest one and saying that's the master. And so all of the other ones that are not the master are forwarding their traffic over to that one. I think we can accomplish the same thing with an HA proxy config at some point. Just haven't got that feature added yet.
Hey, Bill, while you've got a minute there, there was a couple questions that came in that I think are kind of relevant. One of them was from Kevin Dwayne. He asked if it was possible to dynamically populate some of the answers to questions in the Rancher compose file, similar to how the versions show up in the dropdown. So, like instead of the user has to put in the answer, is it possible to sort of give them a series of options to pick from? I think that was the question,
yeah,
Kevin.
So we've got a couple. Our docs have the Docs Rancher catalog page. If you look at these, we have a bunch of different types that can help you ask the questions in the best way possible. We have a string which will produce a text box in the UI. We have integers, Boolean values. We have a password field now, so I think that's actually in this current release coming out next. It's not there today, but that's a big one, so it'll display the password field. Service is a pretty handy one, and that one, you'll notice kind of when Shannon was showing the elk stack that we decompose them a lot for reuse. Elasticsearch by itself has multiple uses, not just the elk stack, though it's one of its more popular ones. So if you want to deploy just an elk stack, you can. But if you're deploying kind of the Logstash and the elk stack, we made it simple so that there's a service type, and so the question prompts you for, where's your Elasticsearch server? And so it gives you a drop-down of available services. And so from that, you can kind of select where that would go. And then we have enums, which basically give you a list of, it'll give you a list of options. So if you wanted, a different type of, where's your Git repo, you could say GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, something like that. And then multi-line just allows you to paste in a blob of text. Currently, those are the types that are supported right now. And then depending on where that data needs to go, you can do the substitution. A good example of what some of these different methods are. Logstash. Here we're doing the filter section, the outputs and the inputs. One of the versions of the template, allowed you to, kind of invented its own hierarchy of keys that would, build these structures within using const. But that key space is it's very confusing. So we simplified that and allowed you to use a multi-line. And what we do is allow you, here is the metadata section and the inputs that's required. And so we use this to escape the multi-lines that are coming. But here's the collector inputs, and the default for that is this value here. So if you've got, people sort of already know log-config. There's tons of documentation on what they need to do, how they would go about configuring this. So we wanted to just basically give you a way to write that syntax based on well-known documentation and standards, and then just drop it in. So we don't do any magic. We just, take a blob of data and give it to you through metadata.
There was a follow-up question on that, Bill, which was, I think that's exactly what we're hoping to see, but also asking about, he was saying, and what would be really interesting is in RunDeck, for instance, that allows you to parse a JSON file that it pulls from a URL. So you kind of update that JSON file, and you don't actually need to version the catalog template. You just sort of modify an external JSON file. So that may be something else to consider if we wouldn't support that today. That might be another interesting use case.
Yeah, we do support the answer files. This answers text, and so you could dump in data that way.
Got it. Cool. One other question that came in was from Keith Raja, and he was asking about how do you specify where to launch the container? So during the catalog, can I define which Docker machine it has to launch on, or will it launch the container randomly? So do you want to talk a little bit about placement and scheduling maybe with these?
Yeah. For the official catalog entries, we've taken a very relaxed approach to scheduling because we don't want to force users to have to set up an environment a specific way. So typically when it comes from us, the rules that are baked in are, if it's a cluster of servers that are going to be storing data, it's ideal not to put them on the same node. But so there's soft affinity rules, anti-affinity rules against themselves. So if there's a container that already is running this service on that host, it will try and go to another. Then we also, but at the same time, a lot of people try out Rancher for the first time on a single node. They run the server and the agent on one box, and it's not a great user experience to launch something and have it immediately fail. That said, we certainly realize that, the other one is the global service and tying it to a label. There's no way to do that loosely, so we can't say, apply to host, but only if, but prefer the ones with this, label. Unfortunately, it becomes a hard requirement that the hosts have that label, and so what ends up happening is you go to deploy that, you don't have that label, it hangs for a while, and it confuses new users. And so at this point, we've taken all the scheduling except for anti-affinity and some soft rules out of our templates. But what we realize is that's not always ideal for production workloads and in cases. So with the sysdig one, we've done something where it is a global service, and you can give it a label to deploy it to, and you kind of select that from a drop-down, or I think it's a text filter. You just type in the label key pair to go look for. That said, I think in a future set of iterations, we need to modify the catalog so that as you're creating it, you can also add scheduling rules. And I think that will address it the best way possible, is that if you're launching it and you're going to want it to launch, go to these hosts and these, send these to that host, you'll be able. We're going to be adding functionality to do that. It's just sort of a matter of when at this point. If you're looking
that's
for...
perfect. Yeah, that's perfect there, Bill. I think there's a couple more questions, but I know we're running up against the top of the hour, and we still probably want to jump into the drone stuff in a little more depth. So why don't we push forward, and I'll try to answer the rest of the questions in text and share them with everybody as we go, and we'll save some for the end as we get going as well.
Okay. So I think our Galera cluster came up, and so we have these 3 nodes all replicating. So everything should be good there. So now we can come in and look at a little bit what we've done. Typically, my workflow when I'm building these, I have a local instance of Rancher running in a Rancher OS VM. It's not required to use Rancher OS. I think it's not a question about that. We do run on CentOS 7, Ubuntu, CoreOS. If you've got, it's got to run Docker is sort of our main requirement. Cent 7 and above has been pretty solid for us. I think 6 has been problematic. But typically what I do is I split windows. I do my Docker Compose YAML on one side, and I'd have like Rancher Compose in another one, or the command line to run redeploy and destroy and watch these all come up. And typically, like what I'm watching for is a lot of the control, because there's several moving. There's the 3 containers composing one instance of the service, and then there's multiple instances of those services, and so coordinating across all of those using all the built-in stuff that's in Rancher, it requires some practice and trial and error. So for the Galera base file, we did end up having to modify the MariaDB, the official MariaDB one. It's roughly just got a couple tweaks, but the big difference is that we've added the Galera plugin. But everything else is essentially the same as the main one, so it's kind of a boring file. And so Galera conf is kind of our typical conf D template. We're adding conf D, we're adding giddy up, and here in this config file, this config template container, we're also doing, you see, like start Galera, and so the base image has its own entry point and will start up and run all by itself. But here we're going to be injecting our own init script. And the reason we do that is the containers have no awareness of each other. And so if I'm going to be creating configuration in a separate container, and that configuration needs to be available before the server starts, I need some way to sort of control or gate that server from starting until that file exists. And so typically what we'll do is take an upstream image and then build a configuration container and write an init script that sort of waits, and then the last thing it does is it execs the original entry point. So we do all of our pre-staging and setup as much as we need to, and then basically go back to the normally scheduled program. And so here you can see that we're actually doing an override of the entry point, because the official image had an entry point, Docker entry, I think is what they call all of theirs. But we're creating a volume in this config container and then sharing that into the Galera server container. And so that file, when it comes up, it sees that the volume's there with that file, and then it'll execute that as its entry point. And the first thing that does is waits for the service to achieve its current scale so that it knows about all it can, as we go through the rest of the config, we have all of the config data about everything else. We wait for the file to exist before moving on, and then we check to see if we're the leader. If we are, then we'll keep going. And then based on whether or not we're the leader, our connect string varies. And what we're doing here is, if you're the leader, there's some bootstrap process that you need to run. And so we look at the lowest create index to do that. We make sure that everything's set up, and then we set the string, and then pass that all along to the Docker entry point as it goes to execute. So that's sort of how we inject configuration data and control flow data into upstream images without needing to manage the upstream image. And typically, that's to keep the operation management overhead lower, because those images are maintained by a community, and you don't have to keep up with their release cycle, what they're doing, how they're changing it, and how's that going to, and then build your own images on top of that, and then publish them. And so it just sort of decouples you from that. And so here the configuration probably changes a little bit less, ideally in a kind of a templated workflow like this. And then just to kind of minimize the overhead of managing that. Then the Galera leader proxy here is just a simple run. It's based on a similar image, a similar small Alpine image. Actually, I don't think we're using this one. This was an attempt at, instead of writing a proxy in Go, we were just going to use SoCat, but decided against it, so we'll ignore that. But here in the config file, the compose files, now that's all expressed. Here you can
Hey,
see
Bill, can you speak up a little bit? It's a little bit hard to hear you. Just talk a little bit more into the microphone.
Sorry about that. So here you can see that as I'm going through the iterations, I have everything sort of hard-coded, and then just have a known set of data. I don't normally go through and figure out what I'm going to parameterize and create that file up front. But at some point, I end up having to do that. And so here in the demo catalog, I took that Galera entry and made a template. So you can see we have this basic flow that there's the top level directory, and in that there's a templates directory, and within that there's directories containing apps. And then within that there's these numerical directories 0, 1, 2, and each one holds the compose files for a new version of the file. And then at this top level, the catalog icon, I'm surprised this is working. There's an extra F in there. But this catalog icon name up until apparently this point is significant, and that's the image that it looks for to display. And then this config file sets the top level, what version is this, is the current version, and then what category, and gives some metadata to the catalog app. And then putting 0, you can just see that essentially what I start with is just copy the files from the compose template directory, and then start editing the Rancher compose YAML and add my questions. And so here you see I have all these hard-coded environment variables, which they shouldn't be hard-coded, and those are things that the user would care about. So there's the Docker compose YAML, and here I just made parameters. I made these variable substitutions. So now I need to get that data from the user. And so that's all just simple text-based data. In the next version of this, I'll go out with the official catalog. These password fields instead of type string will be type password. And that way they'll show dots instead of plain text in the UI. Yeah. So this is our current Galera catalog entry. So we're drone users, and they came out with 0.4 a few months ago, and we've been fairly busy and haven't had time to migrate yet. So it's been on my list, so I thought this would be a good demo for making a catalog entry kill two birds with one stone. So I typically, when I started this, I typically keep a set of version folders 010, and those always contain the compose files that I'm working on, and they line up with similar versions inside the containers directory, and so that's where I keep all the Docker files. And the Rancher Compose Templates library on GitHub is set up similarly, just sort of sorting through it. And that's where all the works in progress go, and so we can have compose files that run on their own. And so let's take a look at, so I did have to cheat a little bit. Typically, I try to reuse the upstream images as much as possible. And so I was trying to do that with the drone 4 image and ran into a bit of a snag. Their current image is the from scratch image, which is pretty much an empty container. There's nothing in it. And so a drone is a statically compiled Go binary, and you just put it in there, and ultimately the container ends up being the size of your binary, which is really, really useful and really great. Some downsides to that, though, are there's no shell. So if you need to troubleshoot or you can't figure out what's going on, it's really hard to kind of get in there and manipulate it. The app itself needs to be pretty verbose and have command line options that make it very verbose to sort of understand what's going on. But it also makes this workflow of using an upstream and injecting configuration and control scripts impossible because there's no shell to sort of execute it. I guess you could create a static Go binary to do it yourself, but that seems a little heavy-handed to just wait for a file. So I do have a PR with drone, moving the base image possibly to BusyBox. We're discussing it, and licensing, just making sure that the license of BusyBox and drone line up. So there is a real PR, and this image is based on that PR. Hopefully it gets accepted upstream. Brad seemed open to it, so hopefully that happens. But for the demo, I have to cheat. All right, so simple thing, the drone data volume. This is just a simple data volume that we're going to need. It's going to have varlib drone, it's going to have the etc drone, and an opt rancher directory. Just some lessons learned on the data volume directory. With Gluster, I built the data volume directory based on the actual image, which is nice because it exports all the volumes already from the Docker file, and then the way Docker works with its layering, it doesn't actually, the image, there's no cost of having two instances of the same image except for where they differ. So I thought, oh, that's great. But I did something similar with the Jenkins version, and something happened where the image upstream disappeared, and so you couldn't pull it back down again. So that sort of made me hesitant to do that. While I still think it's a great idea, if you don't control the image necessarily, there is that risk. And then if you change the data volume directory with an in-place upgrade in line, I think there's some challenges there. So I've also started adding this line, do not change below, because data loss could occur in an upgrade. So here, let's look at the container and what we need to do. This one's pretty simple. And so we just got our Docker file, which is just running Alpine. We're doing just adding dash. And then here we're just adding our confd templates. We're getting confd, the binary. We're adding a couple scripts, and then we're running our entry point here. So the first thing that this entry point needed to do was take the rancher entry script that I want to run in our drone server, or drone daemon, and copy it to the data volume in opt rancher. and then exec conft, the configuration at that point, as far as it's concerned, is done, and conft is going to take over now. And so we have a really simple conft template. It's just basically taking a bunch of the environment variables from the config documentation and making them exportable, so that the start drone, so that the rancher entry point script just sources these environment variables and then executes the drone static, which was what it did in the original implementation. So let's take this and make it a catalog entry. So here we are in R. Let's make our drone IO. And so we're going to make 0, that'll be our initial one. We'll copy our YAML files here. And no attention to the. So here we'll start having our catalog application. These. /rancher1, just assigning it a version here. I typically go with the version of the upstream software and then the rancher rancher1 based on kind of this configuration. And then we'll say this is drone IO. The UUID just needs to be unique. A lot of times we'll just use sort of the entry name or app name -0 with the folder name. Yeah. So next is our question section. Here, we're going to basically need a variable for remote driver and it's just a database. I'll spare everyone walking through each of these. Actually, you know what? Let's do remote driver. Yeah, we'll do this. This will be a type string. It'll be required. And label. Let's get repo source. Description. So here, something similar, it's going to be required. We're going to say the label is database. Okay. And now that we've done that, we can say this will get substituted by the remote driver. And this will be substituted by the database driver. Okay. So what we've done here is basically we've now parameterized the remote driver and the database driver. And so you can substitute variables in both the Docker compose.yaml file or the rancher compose YAML file below the catalog entries. You can't substitute anything in the catalog itself section. If you want to maintain compatibility with Docker compose, you'll want to keep all of the Docker specific, the Docker compose file adhering to the official Docker compose syntax. And then anything that's rancher specific would go in the rancher compose YAML file. If you plan on only ever using this with rancher compose, the command line tool, I believe in newer versions of rancher, you can now mix and match all of that, the keys for each of those in the two files. I personally keep them separated, but I believe now you have the option to parse that, or to merge them. So just for simplicity, we'll just stick with parameterizing those two, but I would do the remote config and the database config and the setting and the debug setting as well. And then each one of these can be a different type. I'm going to go with string for the demo, but the remote driver is limited to, I think, GitHub, Dogs, and GitLab and Bitbucket or something. So you could make that an enum and have it be a drop-down in the UI. You know, there's options on ways to present this to the end user, but we'll stick with this for now. So this config YAML, which sets the high-level metadata about the entry. So drone IO, drone CI server. The version that we want to show right now is 04 enter 1. And this is going to fall into the category of continuous version. So it'll show up in the catalog next to Jenkins. All right, get status. Okay, so we'll add this. I'm not going to add the image. I don't have one at the moment. And so I will push to master for fun. Okay. So if we go here, it takes a while for it to refresh, so I don't expect to see it. To sort of force it to reload right now, we will just delete it. And we'll add it back. And I'm just doing this to force it. The catalog itself will update every 10 minutes or so. So it does a pretty good job of staying up to date on its own. If we had everything syntactically correct there, you should see the new drone IL entry. If I had put a picture in there, it would have shown up. Apparently I didn't do it right. And let me get my questions. So let's take a look at what I did wrong there. So I'm guessing it's here because the questions plural. Yes, it's questions plural. I'm doing this live. Done. All right. Okay, so in the interest of time, we'll do this again. So we're back. This time with questions. So now I can say GitHub, and I can say MySQL. So you can see that we've got our new containers deploying. One thing. So if we go here, we can see now that drone deployed successfully. We have our 3 containers, we have our data volume, our drone server daemon, and then the configuration files that we're going to be using. And so I had it set up. Load balancer. Edit this and have it linked to this one. Should now be able to go. And yeah. Well, I'm not quite sure why that didn't work, but
I think it's okay, Bill. I think you've hit the main concept, though, and explained how to set these things up and to deploy the catalog items. So I think we've covered a lot of the depth of what we wanted to cover. There's been a couple questions that have come in as you were talking, and I wanted to just take a second to go through those if you have a minute. One of there was a question that someone had suggested, about what happens if the one of these linked to containers has to move to another host. Will it continue working, or say a system breakdown or something? Those direct links become somewhat fragile, or are you able to link to a service instead? Are there other ways to solve it?
It depends on the application. So if the application is referencing kind of the containers, and if you have a link to between services, the links update, and as long as you're querying either DNS or something along those lines, you're using our DNS, that the responses will adjust as the things move around. The load balancers also are adjusting as containers come up and go down. Part of the reason, like for instance, Galera, you access that through a load balancer at all, is so that if the master, something did happen to an instance, you don't have to change your IP. You're always just hitting the layer load balancer, and that, if that moves around, you're doing that over DNS, and as long as you're doing periodic lookups, you'll get the new address for that, and so it'll move around with the application. If you're hard coding IPs, right now that will break if you're doing that. In a future release, we're going to make it so things like Zookeeper that are, they tie a server ID and IP pretty tightly together. We're going to make it so that you can apply a label and the IP will be reused on that container. And we're introducing, I think, a pool index, or not the create index, but another index that will be cycled. So the IP and that ID will be kind of paired, which should help with apps like Zookeeper.
There's another question someone asked about how to update the metadata in the stack without a git push. Is that possible? Or once the stack is launched, it's launched?
Right now, once the stack is launched, it's launched, and there's a couple. One, I don't think we've added that to the UI yet. The other bit is, depending on how you're running the apps, the next step is once you change your configuration, typically you have to reload something. We don't have a good hook for that yet. So if the config file changes, restart Nginx or something like that. You could bypass that by running multiple processes in the same container. But the risk of that is managing zombie processes and signal propagation aren't handled without a something that runs as a PID1 like S6 or RUnit. So currently, right now, no. The stack changes at that point when that happens. Pretty sure you can do it with an in-place upgrade. It's been a while since I've tried.
I think that makes sense. Another question that came in was from Kirith Raja, and he was asking about kind of snapshotting and changes to the repo. So he asked if the rancher has options to take a snapshot of the container and to restore it. If he customizes the catalog and deploys a container, how he would prevent that. And his example was, if his private repo had been deleted, but before he deleted it, he launched the container. But after a while, Docker got rebooted during the launch of the container. Will it look for the catalog? Will it look for the repo where he deleted it, or can he still see the private catalog? How much resilience, I guess, is maybe the question, is sort of built into this. Does that make sense? If not, I can open up his mic and maybe he can ask the question himself.
Yeah, I think I understand the question. And so once this is launched, you get this. I actually don't know where the button went in the new UI. But here, once the catalog entry is launched, you get this this view of it, and it has all of the substitutions. You can see the drone password, password drone. All of these were created, basically this is a snapshot from a compose standpoint. And so as long as you're versioning the containers and your the data got included in this, and you're not doing the data sources that are dynamic, the things that are outside of the control of this, can still change. But from this standpoint, from when it launched, here is the exact configuration that it launched. And we used to have a download button, export config. So if you go to a running stack, you can go to the stack view and this compose view, and then do the export the configuration file. And this will download a zip file with the Rancher Compose and the Docker Compose file. And those can be relaunched with Compose, or you can copy and paste them when you add a new stack, you could copy and paste them back into this. They won't go back to a catalog entry. I think the dot catalog stuff gets removed as part of the launch. Yeah,
it does.
So
yeah.
There's no dot catalog. So you can't make it a catalog entry again, but you can certainly get the running config back.
Right. There was another question on this from Axel. No, go ahead, Darren. Did you want to?
I just want to add one thing. So basically, when you launch an entry from the catalog, basically the catalog service and Rancher are really very loosely coupled. They're two separate services. So when you launch something from the catalog, we take all the information, basically copy it, and put it into Rancher. So there's no coupling between those two services. Like the only thing that we keep is when we launch the stack, we remember kind of like a unique ID of like the catalog entry where it came from. So we can look back at the catalog to see if there's an upgrade available, but that's the only thing that we reference back to the catalog. So like once you deploy it, you can delete the catalog, you can delete the Git repo. It's not going to impact the running application. The only thing you're going to see most likely is going to be in the UI, it'll say like error checking for upgrade. That was it.
Great. The next question I had was a question from Axel, and he was saying that we tried to launch a Rancher compose command with the start once listed as value true as a Boolean. It wouldn't work. He had to put it in as a string as true. Is that something that is expected? And is there a way to set this under environments? If it's a source, or maybe he misunderstood it. Does that make sense? Do you want to try and address that question, Bill or Darren?
I can comment. So you're saying it didn't work if it was a string, but if it was a Boolean, it didn't work, but if it was a string, it did.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is
for the launch ones.
Yeah. So we've actually been So Rancher Compose is based off of Loop Compose, which is like the Go implementation of Docker Compose. And so we've been going back and forth actually on this specific issue for a little bit. Basically, the regular Docker Compose, if you run it and you put a Boolean in there, it will issue a warning and says, these values need to be quoted. It really needs to be a string. So basically, the Docker Compose stance is that like if you're putting in key value pairs, they really should be strings. So if you put the word true, the YAML parser will treat it as a Boolean. So it's supposed to be in the next version of Docker Compose, the one that will be released shortly in a week or so. They'll actually issue an error now and say like that's not allowed. So basically, what we've been telling users is just don't use Boolean. You got to quote it because that's what like kind of upstream. That's what the decision they've taken on that, and so we're basically just following suit.
There's another question that Adam asked, and he asked a little while ago. I've been meaning to ask it for a while, but he was asking about could a single HA proxy or load balancer be automatically configured through the catalog, specifically an LB that's outside of the specific stack? And I think the question is about a containerized load balancer in this case, but I think it may also apply to a physical load balancer. I know we've had other people ask about, using the same Route 53 DNS based load balancer. I think the question here is about Rancher load balancers. Can you configure those through the catalog? Anything you want to kind of discuss there, Darren?
I don't know if I fully get the question. Because basically the catalog, anything you can do from a compose file that we support, like the Rancher Compose, you can define a load balancer from a compose file and then basically create a catalog entry out of that. So it is possible to have a catalog entry that deploys a load balancer. Does that sound about right? I don't know if that really answers the question though.
So the question was more, can a catalog entry cause a load balancer outside of the catalog stack, for instance, to get a new host to service config line is what he's trying to figure out.
Oh, so like I deploy something from a catalog entry and add it to an existing load balancer? Is that?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly the question.
Okay. Yeah, so we have like a more advanced feature that honestly is not supported in the UI, but we do this from the command line, and that's selectors. If you're familiar with Kubernetes selectors, basically it's pretty much the same thing. So what you can do is on your load balancer, you can just put a selector and say, just automatically add any instance that has this label. So what you do from the catalog entry is when you're deploying it, you put some label on there. And then so that will automatically add it to the load balancer. We're actually revamping the load balancer configuration to make this even more powerful because basically what we've kind of seen with users is they kind of like to build more of like a load balancer service where they decouple load balancing from the applications. And so in the future, what you'll be seeing is that not only can you have an application be dynamically added to a load balancer, it will also be able to supply additional rules like, hey, add me to this load balancer, but I want to be known under this host name or this path. So that's coming in a future release.
Great. There was another follow-up on the Boolean stuff we talked about just a second ago. Axel was asking, he was saying that in Bill's demonstration, it seemed like we were using Booleans in the catalog compose files all the time. And just a couple minutes ago we sort of used one. So how does that relate to the fact that you're saying compose doesn't support Booleans? Can you guys hit on that?
Yeah, I can elaborate a little bit because it all depends on the exact version of Rancher Compose you're using. And personally, I get a little confused too because Rancher OS is also based off of libcompose, and sometimes they're on different versions. Plus, we have upstream libcompose. So I know in the past, true has worked. And then we ran into some issues where true would actually get parsed in the back end by, like, I think the Python code, and then it would break. So basically, as we've gone through this, we've pretty much come to the conclusion it's like the users just unfortunately need to just quote it because that's going to be what Docker is going to enforce anyways. So it is correct that a lot of things already work today without quoting true. But there are some little gotchas where it fails, and it depends across like Rancher Compose, different versions of Rancher Compose, Rancher OS, yeah, and then upstream libcompose is a different thing. So I know that's kind of confusing, but basically the short of it is, we really have to get people to quote true values. Which, to be honest, I don't like that much. Yeah, I don't like much, but that is like the direction. So that's kind of, it has to do with the fact that the YAML parser is tries to be very smart. So like and different implementations of YAML parsers are slightly different too. So it's like T, F, Y, N, yes, no, true, false. They all get parsed as Booleans, and it's really hard to actually automatically guess if you really meant a Boolean or a string, and so.
Got it. So, I think there was a couple more questions on the load balancing stuff, but I want to wrap up Bill's discussion on, on the compose file. I think we've covered almost everything you wanted to show, Bill. Is there anything else you felt we wanted to make sure we hit before we moved forward?
No, I think I got that was it.
Awesome. So I think the load balancer questions are actually kind of tie in a little bit to some of the stuff that we're going to talk about in 51 in just a second. But Bill, thanks for going through that. I know we kind of got into the details a lot there, but hopefully people understand now with this configuration how to inject files into standard implementations of Docker images and build compose files or build catalog items that can be configured on the fly and push a lot of variable selection down to the user. So thanks for covering all of that. I want to shift then, now just take back the control of the system for a second. And second here, and we're going to go now and talk a little bit just about hold on a second, let me pull this up. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of the just the latest release of Rancher. We only released one in the last since the last meetup, 0.51. I think 0.50 came out the day of the last meetup, and then we released 0.51. And tomorrow we're going to be releasing, or in the next day or so, we're going to be releasing 0.56, which will have a lot going on in it. So, Darren, do you want to just talk a little bit about 51? Because I think some of the questions that were coming in on the load balancer were actually about how to use the service better to deploy random ports and to run almost like a load balancer service. And I know that part of the random port assignment sort of addresses this as well.
Yeah. The random port. Do you want to give me control? And
yeah, sure.
I'll demo the random port assignment.
Okay, you should be the presenter.
Okay, so right now, I believe the random port assignment is actually only supported through the command line. Oh no, so I guess it works in the UI too. Okay, so but I'm gonna show this here from basically from kind of more of a command line perspective. So the way the random ports work is that Docker already has had this feature. We just never supported it. But the way we support it, we had to do a little bit more to kind of make it work across a cluster. But let me show you this. So basically, imagine like I'm deploying something in Nginx. I'm just going to type. Everyone can see. You can see my screen, right, Shannon?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm just going to type this compose file here. So in Docker Compose, you can say ports, and typically for like Rancher, we always bind these. Like either you just don't put ports, or if you're defining ports, you're going to bind them to to the host or something like that. But as many users have figured out, binding ports to the host, you only get that one port once on the host, and so you can't scale up the service, or you can't deploy multiple instances of that stack. And so basically what we've done is we now support this syntax where you can just say, okay, I just want port 80 and just expose it on a random just on some random port. So if I go and deploy this test, I'll show you when I actually go and I create this stack. Now, if I go and I look at the compose YAML file, so you can see we picked a random port for you. So the key thing here is it's not exactly the same as when Docker does a random port, because when Docker does a random port, every single time you launch that container on a different host, you get a different random port, which is not so great because you don't know what port it's on. It's like you have to, for each host, you have to find what's the right port. And so what we've done here is when you use the syntax of just saying, give me a random port, we pick a random port and we reserve that for you basically across the whole cluster, such that when that application gets deployed on any host, it gets the same port on every single host. Yeah, so that's basically that feature there. The second thing, major thing that we added in 51 was the audit logs. And this is, great feature for more of our enterprise customers who want to know what's going on. But basically, in the audit logs here, you can see exactly what the users are doing. So you can see what environment they're working in, who's the actual user. So you can see if I go back through here, I can see me and Vincent, we're doing some things here. You can actually see container execute is you executed a command in the container, which is actually when you pop open a shell in the UI, you're actually executing the shell. But you can see I updated some settings, basically you can see what's going on, who's doing it, what IP they came from, how they were authenticated. This is a UI session. If I go down here, I can see this API user was doing some things. So basically, just give you a whole audit trail of what's going on in the system. And this audit log will be further enhanced to not only will we put user actions in there, but system actions, because there's a lot of things we're doing in the background, creating and deleting containers. based off of services and things like that. We'll be, logging that information shortly too.
Darren, how would you export these, or can you export it to Logstash or Splunk or something?
I mean, not just from basically this is all available in our API. So just kind of under the normal, let me see if I know, I'm not quite sure. Audit logs, put the API link. And right now the audit logs are only available to an admin user. Audit logs. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so basically all this information is available through the API. So if you wanted to integrate and pull it into a different system, right now you'd be hitting the API to do that. Okay. So I did want to comment. So right now, so let's see, 51. I'm not sure when that was released. It was sometime in December. So typically, we put out typically. Oh yeah, the version number is actually the week of the year. So 51 would have been it was Christmas actually. So anyway, so typically we get a release out about every week or every other week. So this has kind of been a long break for us where we haven't released something. The reason why is we've basically gutted the whole networking infrastructure. Networking has been the I think the biggest thing that we people will run into issues around. And so we were previously using an older version of a lot of the IPsec stuff. We're using Raccoon. We've completely gutted that and put in Charon, which is a much better implementation, but it gives us a lot more control over what's going on. So we've completely redone the networking under the hood. It's still using the same, basically, kind of data path, which is the Linux kernel and IPsec. It's just the management of it, how we're managing it is just completely different. And so basically the reason why you're seeing a longer kind of release cycle here is the amount of testing that we've been putting in this. We really want to make sure that this works, and not only for new installations, but for upgrades. And so upgrades is particularly difficult because we have a completely different implementation of IPsec. And so when we deploy a new version, it does the full upgrade properly and everything. So that release, the next one, which I don't know the number, I think it's like 56, is really slated for today. Hopefully we do get it out today. If it's not today, it'll be tomorrow.
Got it. So Darren, on that, there was kind of a question coming in that someone asked about was where do you go information about exceptions, things that don't work? I think Axel was saying sometimes when he mistypes an image name, it just seems to keep the container integrated, but he doesn't understand how to sort of understand why things are happening. And is there a troubleshooting guide? Can we, obviously, the more we can do to expose to the user what's happened, but even from an administrator, when something gets hung, can you show a little bit about maybe using the process tool and how to use that to debug problems?
Yeah, and so right now your best way to figure out what's going on, is to look at the process log. So these are all the various processes that are currently running. If you click all, you can see all the various processes. So typically when you deploy a container, the process name is instance create. So if I go instance.create, I just search for that. So we keep these logs for about a day. So basically you can click on one of these, and this basically will kind of tell you what's going, like what it did. This is more like the internals of what's going on in Rancher. But kind of the key thing is if there was an error, it pops up with this little warning icon. There'll be a little warning icon either on this screen or the next one here, like when you say, oops, sorry, not being API. what's the wrong button? When you say expand all, and when you click on that, you can see the exception. So like that's kind of the best thing right now to see that. But I did want to point out, because we know it's kind of difficult to basically track, kind of like what Rancher is doing, like especially when things go wrong. So if you want, you can look at this PR. You can kind of pay attention to this one PR that I have up here. This will go in very soon, but we're doing a lot more logging around the service and bubbling more of this up, into the UI. So you can see, like when you deploy a service and a container fails, we'll keep the container still associated to the service, but like in a failed state. And then you can click on that and see the error message. And then the error messages we're cleaning up, so they'll be like a little more concise. Before they were a little verbose and had a bunch of junk in it that didn't make any sense. We're cleaning up those. And then additionally, what we've added is when things don't scale, or sorry, when things don't schedule properly, we'll tell you why. Before, if you could actually see the error, sometimes it's hard to even see the error because the container goes away. But if you could actually see the error, it would just say like failed to find a placement. But now we'll actually say like scheduling error, port 80 needs to be available, which can basically know that, okay, well, there was no port 80 available on any host. Or it'll say like scheduling error, no candidates, which means there was no host available, something like that. So right now, the best thing is to poke around in the process log and figure out what's going on. But we're greatly enhancing this. This will come out not in the release that we're doing today, but it'll be in the one that's coming next week, or the one we'll start working on next week.
Great. Okay, I think that covers most of what we wanted to cover about the new release, and when we get into all the details of the new release, we'll certainly be putting out some release notes and making sure that we kind of provide a really detailed change log with this one, because it will be a pretty significant release. One you'll probably want to test a little bit, just because we're what you'll see over the next few releases as we get ready to release the 1.0 implementation of Rancher is a lot of work to stabilize, improve, fixing tons of bugs, and making a lot of anything we see that we think there's performance issues, we're going to jump in and try to root those out. We've been doing a lot of testing on networking, scale, and the like. So I think someone just asked ETA for 1.0. We're definitely in targeting in this quarter, so sometime between now and maybe the end of March. But at the end of the day, we're not going to release it until we feel like it passes all of our really our level of quality expectation. I mean, at the end of the day, we know a ton of you are running this stuff in production already. We get questions all the time and requests from people that are using it. We want to make sure that, as we, instead of adding a lot of new features, we're really just focused on driving, keeping the product functionality where it is, but driving a lot of quality into it right now. So you'll see those type of things. And any big features we're working on, a lot of those are probably, there are people working on features, new things in storage, new things in networking, and, all sorts of cool stuff. But it's mostly going to plan for sort of post 1.0. So why don't I grab control back here, and we can wrap up. I think we've covered a ton here. We're already at 2 hours effectively, but this was, I really appreciate so many people coming in today and asking all these great questions. If you haven't already, join the beta program, give us feedback. We'd love to get in touch, hit our forums, docs, IRC channels, file issues, post issues to both Rancher and RancherOS and GitHub. These are months old, these images, but let us know if you're seeing things that are problems or just doesn't make sense. We're trying to build a great open source product. That means we need contributions. We need people out there who help fix the docs, help fix the product. We just released our first sort of ebook that a bunch of the guys here worked on around kind of really providing detailed look at how to do continuous integration and deployment with Docker and Rancher, and it's really meant to kind of lay out, the best practices for, building a code pipeline that's going to, push your code through and leveraging Rancher. So if you're interested in this, it's free. It's available to download. Just register, and we email it out to you, so you can hit that site and download it. But again, feedback always welcome. The next volume of this will come out that's a little more on the operational side, dives into monitoring, logging, some of the things we've covered in meetups, but the latest best practices. Really want to document things really well for people to understand. At the end of the day, you don't do containers for a container's purpose. You don't use Rancher because it's great. You use this stuff to accelerate your development and push code out a lot faster. So that's really what we're trying to make happen. So thank you to everyone who joined today. If I didn't answer your question, I will definitely come back and get so many questions today. I couldn't quite get to all of them, but I will definitely come back, look through, and respond via email or text. Bill, thanks for demoing all of that catalog stuff. We'll make a recording of this available as we always do. Darren, thanks for all of your time as well. And please send us any notes you have via IRC or Twitter or anything else where we can help you out. Thanks again, everyone, for your time. It was a lot of fun. Have a great day.